So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Constanza Vidal Bustamante. I'm a PhD candidate in psychology at Harvard University. And I'm excited to share some of the work that I've been doing for my dissertation. So to give you some context, although we know that stress is a well-established contributing factor to the onset and progression of psychopathology, we know relatively little about how stressful events are influencing our daily life over days, weeks, months to subsequently predict clinical outcomes. And my doctoral research is interested in using smartphones and wearables to examine the influence of real-world daily stressors on emotions and behaviors like sleep and socializing, and see how this also relates to or can be used to predict clinical outcomes in the longer term. So we study this in first-year college students who, as you know, are undergoing this very important life transition where they must navigate lots of different kinds of stressors in their daily lives, including new and increased academic and social demands, oftentimes irregular sleep, all of which we know can contribute to psychological distress. So in this study that I'm gonna show you today, we leverage continuous actigraphy data and daily smartphone surveys to study 49 first-year college students for a full academic year. So here I'm showing you a year in the life of the average freshman. So these are group average time series over a full year. I don't know if you can see my mouse there. Yeah. Okay, so on the x-axis you have days. I'm showing you here, you have the fall semester and the spring semester separated by winter break in the middle. There are also other breaks for each semester and final exam periods at the end of each semester. So the main takeaways from the slide are that there's substantial variability in most metrics that you see here over time, and also that there's a lot of structure in this variability. So this is just not just random noise. For example, we see that during school breaks, students felt less stress, as you see at the bottom. They also slept longer. As you would imagine, they spend less time working and more time socializing with others. And we found similar patterns for weekends compared to weekdays within semesters as well. Something that surprised us a little was that the trajectories for these metrics varied by stress source. So specifically between academic stress, so this would be stress related to grades, assignments, exams, things like that, and social or interpersonal stressors, so stressors that participants were reporting related to friends, family, roommates, significant others, any other people. So on average, we saw that academic stress is a lot more frequently reported than social stress across the sample. But while academic stress goes down substantially during breaks, the frequency of social stressors remain fairly stable across a year, despite obviously these big changes in environment that you have from semester to breaks and so on. So in fact, we found that the frequency of reporting social stress, but not academic stress, predicted subsequent global psychopathology symptoms at the end of the semester, even after controlling for baseline symptoms. So building on top of these original, more group-level results, ongoing work that we're developing now is trying to zoom into the individual to now assess how specific stressors that our participants encountered in their daily life might be influencing their daily well-being and behavior. And here I'll be just showing you some preliminary analyses on a smaller pilot data set where students were providing one semester of data. So now I'm showing you a single subject, and I'm showing you time series for the subject for self-reported stress levels and negative affect, which is our daily index of well-being, and this is a composite score of individual items for sad, upset, angry, irritable, anxious. And the gray shading is showing you just bumps in negative affects, just for easier visualization. And at the bottom, I'm showing you specific events that we extracted from now voice diaries that participants were completing at the end of each day, where they reported the main events of the day and how they responded to them. And the labels are admittedly pretty vague for these events for a reason. We just wanted to avoid identifying detail. I found it very hard to share how rich and exciting this data set is without running into problems of identifiability. So in line with the group results that I showed you just in the previous slide, we're finding that days with heightened negative affect coincide most frequently with days where participants experience social stressors, such as arguments with roommates, with peers, with family, or also instances of receiving negative feedback or social rejection from others. And in fact, when you look across the subject's data, we see that social stress tracks pretty closely with same-day negative affect that you see the plot bottom left. But academic stress does not, and conversely, academic stress tracks with how much how much time the participant was spending on schoolwork, but social stress did not associate with that. We're also studying how these different stressors relate to same-day social behavior and sleep duration, although at least for the subject, as you see here, there doesn't seem to be a very clear dissociation by stressors in these other behavioral metrics. Ultimately, with this data set, we are interested in assessing what these daily experiences of stress and response can tell us about participants' mental health outcomes for years to come, including during an unprecedented new life transition such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which we also captured through some follow-up studies with the same participants. And just to show you one example for the same participant, pilot participant that I showed you in the previous slide, we see that they had elevated global clinical symptoms during their freshman year, which actually remained fairly stable across this 3-year period. Again, despite the substantial changes, obviously, going from freshman year and sophomore year, normal college years, to then this unprecedented life transition, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. All right, so to wrap it up, today I showed you that deep phenotyping can reveal both shared and person-specific dynamics of stress and response in ecologically valid settings and close to real time. Stressful events encountered in daily life varied not only in nature, but also in their affective and behavioral correlates. Specifically, we found that while academic stressors are the norm, they seem to be associated with increased time spent working and mostly disappear when school is not in session. We're finding that social stressors are a much more sensitive marker of psychological distress, both in the short and in the long terms. And finally, ongoing research that we're excited about is trying to get at more revealing the real-time affective and behavioral correlates of specific stressors within individuals that might have potential implications for the prediction of clinical outcomes in the future. With that, thank you very much to all of you, my collaborators and supporters and funding sources, and I'm happy to take questions now or during the break. I know we're short on time. Thanks.
Take one question, if that's okay?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm very interested in this idea of social stress. So were you able to disaggregate at all the difference between in-person social stress or related to social media type stress?
Not social media. So we have a full follow-up data set that we collected during COVID for 3 months. That was basically the same kinds of data. Participants were completing daily voice diaries, daily surveys. We did not have the actigraphy data for that. It was too much of a hassle to track all these students that suddenly dispersed across all the United States or internationally as well. And that's one of the questions I'm very curious to get into. Right now, we're trying to develop the analysis strategy just within the pilot data set, which we will then apply to the full year data set that we have. And then the idea is to then replicate with the COVID data set as well and exactly get at these differences. Because one thing that I'm very interested in is that moving beyond these broader academic and social labels, I'm trying to parse whether there's something else that could be either academic or social that has that more heavier significance on their well-being, which might be something related to just comparison to others or status, which could be either in an academic setting or in a more purely social setting. And that's what we're trying to parse with the voice diaries in particular. They give us the academic and social labels that I had earlier that I showed here were coming from surveys that participants were filling out, but that didn't give you the detail of what happened that day. Whereas with the voice diaries, we're trying to code exactly for these things. Like, did it have basically disentangling different kinds of social stressors, different kinds of academic stressors that might have more or less of a reputational status component that my guess is that that's actually what's driving most of the impact on well-being and subsequent potential development of psychopathology as well. And the idea is to see exactly during COVID that farther fractionates with now you have digital interactions become much more common, and whether they can replace substitute for what used to be in-person social interactions, or whether that creates new sources of stress that you didn't have before. So super interesting question that we're trying to look into as well. Thank you.